Good afternoon. The Appropriations Subcommittee on the State and Local Transportation will come to order, and will the clerk please call the roll for today's attendance?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Representative Steele.
Here.
Representative Slaw.
Present.
Representative Borton. Representative DeSena.
Here.
Representative Robinson.
Present.
Representative Morgan.
Present.
Representative Edwards.
Here.
Madam Chair, you have 6 of 7 members. You have a quorum.
Awesome. Okay, so today, Representative Robinson moves to adopt the minutes of the April 23rd meeting. Okay. There being no objections, the motion prevails by unanimous consent. Okay, today's chair was called to discuss the transportation bonding and debt services, as well as their interdepartmental grants and contracts. This discussion will be provided insights from our very own House Fiscal agent, William Hamilton, and I appreciate I just wanted to unroll this a little bit because I think it's confusing the portion of the budget in which we have to pay other departments to do services on our behalf. So hopefully you can put some clarity on that. And the bond debt, where what we've borrowed recently, and all the different bonds that we have through the state of Michigan. So whenever you're ready, William, and get your papers situated, we'll be here for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we have 2 items on today's agenda. As the chair noted, one, we will be talking about the Michigan Department of Transportation's bond program, the use of bond financing to help finance their capital construction program. We are also talking about what are described as interdepartmental grants in the budget. I'll start out by noting that I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. I've instead given you a great deal of paper to sift through. And if you don't mind, I think I'd like to take the 2 topics out of order a little bit, start with the interdepartmental grants. And one other thing I'd like to do, I've noticed sometime in testimony, folks will begin, in some sense, kind of in the middle. They don't set a context for the discussion. It's not always apparently tied into the budget. So I'd like to begin at the beginning. As part of your packet, right behind the minutes in the agenda, is a copy of the current year state transportation budget. It's Senate Bill 747 from last session. And I just want to point out a couple things in this budget. There are 2 parts to appropriation bills. And again, we don't normally even look at the enacted budget in committee. We generally look through House Fiscal Agency analysis documents. Sometimes once a year we get the line print of a substitute. But this is the actual enacted budget. And if you go through it, there are 2 parts. Part 1, the appropriations, the line items, and Part 2, the boilerplate that in some sense guides or directs the appropriations. And Part 1, the appropriations, are divided into appropriation units. Some of the units represent MDOT operating or administrative activities or programs. So they have an appropriation unit for finance and administration, for highway maintenance, for engineering services, and much of that activity is performed by MDOT employees, obviously. Some of it is performed under contract with the Michigan Department of Transportation. For example, in engineering services, they contract with engineering consulting firms to do some of the engineering work that they do. In highway maintenance, they contract with county road commissions in cities and villages to do part of the highway maintenance program. So that's all by way of introduction. One of the items that you see on the second page of the bill, it's actually page 345 of the enacted bill, section 103 is described as collection, enforcement, and other agency support services. So this is an instance where, unlike work performed by MDOT employees or work performed by external contractors, this is work to advance the transportation program performed by other state departments. And it's set up separately in the bill, and the mechanism for reimbursing these other state departments are interdepartmental grants, or IDGs. And that's all by way of introduction. So toward the back of your folder, paper-clipped is a paper that describes interdepartmental grants. I apologize for paper shuffling. Here it is, paper-clipped. So in the current year transportation budget, the gross appropriation for all of these different interdepartmental grants and contracts totals $50.7 million. So one aspect of these interdepartmental grants, they reimburse other state departments for services provided to the Michigan Department of Transportation, to transportation funds, or in some other way to advance the transportation program. So there are 20 separate line items, and they reflect the four major fund sources in the budget: the Michigan Transportation Fund, the MTF, the State Trunkline Fund, the Comprehensive Transportation Fund, and the State Aeronautics Fund. And they reimburse, as you can see in the bill, the Civil Service Commission for work they perform, the Attorney General, the Department of Technology Management and Budget, the Michigan Department of Treasury, the Auditor General, Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, and the Secretary of State. So I'll just highlight a couple of these interdepartmental grants. The MTF grant to the Michigan Secretary of State is $20 million. That's set in Act 51. That's the upper limit of MTF appropriation to the Secretary of State, and that partially reimburses the Secretary of State for the cost of collecting vehicle registration taxes, and title fees. It only partially reimburses them. It's $20 million. The total cost of the program is closer to $90 million. And again, if you look in the packet, so it's appropriated. This appropriation is effectively in two different places: the $20 million here in the state transportation budget, and then in the general government budget, it's a fund source supporting branch operations for the Secretary of State in the general government budget. Why do we do it that way? It is a way to track appropriations that are effectively made in two different budget areas. So there's an appropriation for branch operations in the Secretary of State budget, and this $20 million here. If you look, if you look at the very first page, the summary page, in every budget you'll see gross appropriations, the interdepartmental grant total, and then the difference is adjusted gross appropriations. And that's a way of accounting for these appropriations in two different budgets. So when we talk about one budget standalone like this budget, we'll talk about gross appropriations. But when, say, the House Fiscal Agency Director talks to the full Appropriations Committee about all the state budgets, we'll use adjusted gross appropriation so we don't double count those two appropriations. Adjusted gross appropriation is the better figure when talking about all the state budget, or the total state budget in total. So that's a quick run through. Is that helping? Does that making sense? Can we stop for questions?
If you repeat that last line, that about not counting it twice because the Secretary of State has it as a revenue and we have it as an expense, that's the part that I get confused
so it's, on. So in the Secretary of State budget, and I included a copy of the line item summary for the general government budget. So in branch operations, there's an appropriation of $98.1 million. So that's an appropriation in the Secretary of State budget. $20 million of that is supported from the MTF. So in effect, $20 million is appropriated here in the general government budget, and then we also appropriate $20 million in the transportation budget as an IDG. And again, that's a way to track. It's effectively budgeted or appropriated twice, and we can track it that way and adjust for it in talking about all the budgets together. I don't know if that was a good explanation or not. So to sum this all up in a sentence, interdepartmental grants are simply a budgetary tool that allow for one state department to effectively reimburse another state department for services performed. And it's especially critical in the transportation budget with the use of restricted funds, so that when a general fund agency is doing work for transportation funds, they're reimbursed with restricted funds, and we can track that appropriation. So on that, I'll pause for a moment, and we will, so you all have a paper, a publication that goes into that in a bit more depth. So let's now move to the other topic, the state bond program, the Michigan Department of Transportation's program of using bond financing to help finance their capital construction program. And we've got a publication that we updated just last year. It's up to date. Before I start, actually, I've got a couple of notes that aren't in the publication, just a couple of things I looked up last night. There's a Federal Highway Administration website of FHWA statistics, and I noted there are 43 states, plus the District of Columbia, that have outstanding bond indebtedness for transportation projects. In 2023, that totaled $241.6 billion across the country, and states continue to sell bonds for Columbia, sold a total of $13 billion in bonds for transportation programs. Some of the issuers are state transportation agencies. In Michigan, the Michigan Department of Transportation. In other states that have toll roads, oftentimes the toll road is managed by a separate toll authority. A bit like in Michigan, there's a Mackinac Bridge Authority that has separate authority to govern the Mackinac Bridge. Many states have toll authorities that sell bonds to help finance those facilities. As an example, so Michigan has approximately $3 billion in outstanding indebtedness. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But New Jersey, as an example, has $36.4 billion in outstanding debt. Again, much of that is related to their toll system. Texas has $27.6 million of outstanding indebtedness. And just a couple other quick things about Michigan. Michigan first sold bonds for transportation financing back in 1919. $50 million, there was a $50 million bond issue. That's Public Act 25 of 1919, if we want to look that up. And in 1950, Public Act 22 of 1950 sold $100 million of revenue bonds to help complete the Edsel Ford Freeway in the city of Detroit. So that's all by way of background. So I'm going to jump into the fiscal brief that you should have before you. And a couple of quick things. So the authority to sell bonds or to issue bonds actually rests in the Michigan State Transportation Commission. They have the constitutional and statutory authority to sell bonds for transportation purposes by pledging constitutionally restricted transportation revenue. And when we say constitutionally restricted revenue, that's from fuel taxes and vehicle registration taxes. And the Commission also has the authority to sell bonds by pledging federal grant revenue, or pledging bonds in anticipation of federal grant revenue. And those are called Garvey bonds. This Commission authority is put into effect when the Michigan Department of Transportation goes to the Commission and asks for authority to sell bonds. And these bonds are not full faith and credit bonds of the state of Michigan. The state of Michigan is not pledging its, like as I say, full faith and credit. The security for that bonds is the pledge of state restricted transportation revenue. They are considered revenue bonds. And so all the bonds issued by the Michigan Department of Transportation have that character. They're revenue bonds. The department does not need legislative approval to sell bonds, Public Act 51 does require the Commission to provide the House and Senate Appropriations Committee with a list of projects for which the notes or bonds will be issued at least 30 days before the bonds are issued. So when the department sells bonds, the Appropriations Committee do get a list of effectively the basket of projects for which bond proceeds can be used. Bond proceeds are not appropriated. We don't see them in the budget. The interaction with the budget occurs in the debt service section of the budget. Again, in the copy of the budget bill I showed you, the very first detailed appropriation unit is for debt service. And so the Michigan Department of Transportation sells bonds by pledging their share of constitutionally restricted revenue. They pledge their state trunkline fund revenue. And that's one thing that was misstated in Senate committee last week. There was the suggestion that the Michigan Transportation Fund provides the debt service payment. The debt service payment is made from the state trunkline fund share of revenue. Actually, that's why I brought my big flow chart. They sell state trunkline fund bonds by pledging the state trunkline fund at the bottom of this chart. The payment comes from that basket at the bottom of the chart. They can also sell bonds by pledging comprehensive transportation fund revenue, and when they do that, those proceeds are used for public transportation projects such as bus purchases, bus equipment for transit agencies. So in this paper, we're focusing primarily on the state trunkline fund. The paper has a fair amount of detail about bond issues. I'm going to project one, if I can, maybe. Oh, can we do this? No, I guess I can't do this. There we go.
Bill, are you trying to get it on the screen?
Oh, then we'll forget this. I thought,
We could
no,
probably.
it's quite all right, because you'll have this. I won't try to project. I'll bring your attention to
Just refer to what page you're on.
to page 7 of the paper. Let's do that. I thought I had this all set up. Oh, I apologize. It's the fiscal, there we go. Look at, so it's the page 7 that has a little bar chart. And if you look all the way to the left, back in 1995, 96, 97, 98, outstanding debt on state trunkline fund bonds was in the range of $670 million. Beginning in the 2000s, there was a bond program, sometimes referred to as Build Michigan 2, and the Michigan Department of Transportation sold a number of bonds, including bonds by pledging federal grant revenue, Garvey bonds. And so you see outstanding debt begin to bump up in the early 2000s. And at that time, it peaked at about $2.3 billion. And then in the 2010s, it began to, the department didn't sell additional bonds, began to pay down the bonds. And so by 2019, outstanding debt rested at about $1.1 billion. And you can see in 2019, $1,058 million. In 2020, the Rebuilding Michigan Bond Program was initiated, and you see the increase in outstanding debt beginning in 2020. And again, these are, when we talk about the Rebuilding Michigan program, in 2020, the State Transportation Commission authorized the department to sell up to $3.5 billion of bonds for their highway construction program. And as described in more detail in the paper, there have been, I believe, 3 different bond sales. To date, they have sold $2.8 billion of the $3.5 billion authorization. And the department anticipates selling the remaining $700 million in the balance of this calendar year. The one thing that is slightly out of date in the paper, it says that the commission authorized the $3.5 billion through December 2024. I believe that earlier this year, the commission extended that authorization through December of this year. So they have till December 31st of this year to sell the remaining $700 million. I'll pause at that point.
Rep. Edwards, do you have a question on his presentation, or do you want, I can go to Morgan first because he has a specific question on this graph. Okay, why don't we start with Rep. Morgan, and then we'll go to Rep. Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Bill. A question on this graph you have on the state trunk line fund versus the bonds. It looks like we are sort of at that cap. I'm curious if there is insight that you can share as to, it looks like we've been bonding for a lot longer than I think I realized originally, going back all the way to 95. What is the incentive to bond for this versus just allocating the money in the state budget for it over that period of time?
Well, actually, my chart only goes to 1995. Effectively, we have bond issues, I think, in 1992, 1987. There are gaps, but all the way back to 1919. Of course, one of the reasons the department bonds and all state highway agencies bond is you can advance their construction program as opposed to waiting to build up the cash. So highway users, road users, have the benefit of an improved facility today or next year or the year after, rather than waiting 10, 15, 20 years. They can advance capital preventive reconstruction and rehabilitation projects to extend the life of pavement. So that's one of the principal reasons they would do it. Also, in recent years, interest rates have been historically low, so it was a good time to borrow. One other thing that comes to mind, so when you look at the financial, like the department's financial statements, and you see the bond sales, you'll see effectively the par value of the bonds sold. So recent bond issues have been, say, $800 million. And it's not shown in the financial statements, but because the interest rates are favorable in the bond market, they bid up the price of bonds. So for an $800 million bond issue, the Michigan Department of Transportation has actually received over $1 billion. So that's in the text there. So the face value and the stated interest rates in actuality are somewhat different than shown on the financial statements. MDOT receives more money, and the effective interest rate is lower than the stated rate on the bond. I guess one other thing I meant to note, so there in Act 51 there is a limit on how much they can bond, and so I don't misstate. Let me just double check. I should have highlighted this. I know one thing that is sometimes asked, are these bonds callable? Can the department call them, refinance them? Not initially. Some bonds are not callable. Some are callable after a certain period of time, so many years the department can call them and refinance them or refund them at a favorable interest rate, if that happens. MDOT hires consultants to help them with that process. And so MDOT's policy is to refinance bonds if they are callable and if refunding would achieve a net present value of at least 3%. And so MDOT has routinely done that, refinanced older bonds to achieve a net present value savings.
Just to go back, did you get your question? Okay, and then you were going to say, and just if you could put a pin in it, how much that we can actually borrow. You said it was somewhere in your paper.
I found it.
How much is it?
So, Public Act 51 of 1951 limits state trunkline fund debt service to 50% of the previous year's constitutionally restricted revenue credited to the STF. Or another way to put this, constitutionally restricted STF revenue must be at least twice the amount of the related STF debt service. And State Transportation Commission policy is more restrictive. It requires a 4-to-1 revenue to debt service coverage ratio. And currently, STF debt service is below those limits. Currently, in the last bond statement, STF revenue is 5.4 times the amount needed to cover STF debt service. So they're below the statutory and policy limits. So I'm not sure how much additional they can sell. As noted, they anticipate selling an additional $700 million by the end of the year.
That's a terrible formula. Rep. Edwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to know if you were aware of any other states were using the same similar revenue bonds for transportation?
Yes, it's a fairly common method of financing big infrastructure projects. Again, I can send you the site, or actually a copy of the Federal Highway Administration website that identifies all the state agencies and toll authorities that use that method, selling bonds by pledging revenue. In fact, that is how the Mackinac Bridge was built, selling bonds by pledging future toll revenue as a source of repayment.
Sure.
Bills available after hours, too. Rep. Robinson?
Who said that?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you talk to me about how much, let me go back to my question because I wrote it down. How many years and how much money will it take to pay off the most current bonding done by Governor Whitmer?
At the last, well, so this is before the anticipated $700 million sale, which hasn't happened yet. So at the on page 9 of the document, we show anticipated debt service with the current outstanding debt going through 2050. So through 2050. Through 2050. Oh, Medic, good afternoon. So, so again, that would, to fully retire the existing outstanding debt, and the bonds are structured, they're not structured like a traditional home mortgage or a car payment. They're not equal payments. They're often sold in series. Like, so your $800 million bond issue will be sold in a series with different maturity dates, in some cases different interest rates, and that's structured in some cases, in many cases, for the needs of the bond market. So MDOT will hire bond consultants. They'll work with financial underwriters, big financial firms on Wall Street to structure the bond sale, again with different series, different interest rates, different maturities.
So you're saying it could be, we're talking about another 25 years
For the very
so,
tail of it, yeah.
But can you estimate how much, because you're talking about interest here as well, yeah?
Well, sure,
So
they're
if
sold
you
with,
could ballpark how much that's going to cost the state just to get from under these bonds, could you kind of
I don't have that. We can get that from MDOT. I think they can calculate that. Again, the other factor to consider is that each year the facility decays. I mean, so every year a highway facility, a bridge, will decay, deteriorate, and so the purpose of the bond is to upgrade, rehabilitate that facility to prevent that decay. So it's a calculation.
Maybe MDOT can speak on that, if you have that information, what he asked about. How much is, I think he was asking for the total cost of what these bonds will cost us over the next 25 years to be able to pay off that current debt. Is that your question?
That's correct.
That's the question.
I can provide that information. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I can get that for you today.
Okay. And then my question was, I wasn't sure, looking at your chart, it's two numbers. One is 3.2 billion. Is that the total debt, or is it 257? I'm not sure of the difference between these on page 7 and page 8. The difference between those charts. I'm confused on those two.
Oh, so on page 7, that is outstanding debt obligation
Everything.
of the state trunk line fund, and yes, outstanding
Everything for transportation.
on the highway side of the program.
Okay.
So the two at the very top number, little tiny print, 3,288.9 billion. You can tie that in to the 2023 financial statement. So that's the amount of state trunk line fund debt, and then the page
Is how much it costs per year.
8 is the annual debt service.
Service per year, okay.
So in 2024, so that's the amount paid from the state trunk line fund to service debt.
And it's only coming out of the bottom bucket.
It is only coming from the bottom bucket.
And we're almost at the max of what we can borrow based on the revenue in which we receive, based on that complicated formula-ish.
We're below the limit.
We're below, okay, there you go.
I just,
Okay.
I don't know if we're talking about we're talking about tens of billions of dollars, so I'm glad, I would like to see that information, so
Okay,
thank you.
that's fair. And then Rep. DeSanta.
I'll be 87 in 2050. I'm hoping to have my own autonomous jump jet Harrier by then. Will we need roads
Okay.
in 2050? I don't know. And I think when you say we're under the limit, I think it's probably a safe assumption to say that we're probably maxed out or close to maxed out on what we could borrow unless we doubled our state's population or had some very, very fortunate situation happen in Michigan, which none of us see on the horizon. Thank you.
I'll only say that when I say below the limit, I don't mean like a practical, we're below the statutory limit and the commission policy limit. That's the limit of my knowledge. And I guess let's see one other thing. So on the chart, we did this last year, so I carry outstanding debt through 2023, and I included just one little page from the MDOT website that shows outstanding debt through 2024. The department and the Office of Financial Management have not yet issued the 2024 financial statements because I think there's a delay in book closing, which is delaying the financial statements. But when the financial statements are issued, we're assuming it's going to look exactly like this. That's a problem with paper. It's a lot of paper shuffling.
Just a follow-up.
Follow up, go ahead.
So essentially, tell me if I'm way off base here, we've borrowed from the next 25 years of people entering the workforce to pay for our roads over the last 3 years, four years?
Since 2020.
Since over the last 4 years, we've borrowed from the next 25 years of people entering the workforce in Michigan to pay for the roads for 4 years. They're going to be paying it off. The people retiring won't be paying that. I mean, that's
Well,
essentially a true statement if they stay here.
Well, needless to say, when a state agency, when MDOT borrows money, effectively we're pulling money, tax revenue from the future, from future
People.
future people who pay currently motor fuel taxes, vehicle registration taxes, or 20 years in the future, some alternative tax that goes for transportation purposes. Yes, from the future.
Rep. Morgan, and sometimes our interest rate was so low, it was less than inflation, was we borrowed this money from the past. That's the only benefit of that, but I'm not speaking on behalf of this. You are.
Thank you, Chair. We're exactly on the same page, I think. But to Representative's question, I think we would be borrowing from anybody driving on the roads in the future. So up until 2050, I suspect we would all still be driving. So it is from kind of all of us. But and it does sound like some of that is that the rates were so low that it made some sense to do it. And the question I have for you is, it goes back before 2020, though. You laid out for us that it's going back to before I was born. I think that we've been using this bonding mechanism, right?
Well, exactly. And again, it's a common financing tool in state highway agencies, in tolling authorities. And again, two ways to look at it. I don't want to sound like an advocate or putting my thumb on the scale. So needless to say, you're pulling revenue from the future. But again, over the next 25 years, motorists will have the benefit of an improved facility. If you'll upgrade these facilities, that's...
Mr. Hamilton, the bonds, for those to be used in a roadway, they have to be a roadway that will last longer than the life of the bonds, right?
Well, yes, it's for the capital program, and I've talked to MDOT in the past about this. It's for them to testify, but they evaluate the expected life of these facilities when they rehabilitate them, reconstruct them, and so that is the intention, but again, that's for them to testify to, that the goal is for the facility to outlast the bonds. And again, in this case, the bonds aren't used for one specific facility, like the Mackinac Bridge sold bonds for the Mackinac Bridge. The state toll authorities sell bonds for that toll facility. In Michigan, the bond program supports their entire capital construction program. You look at the 5-year plan, and many of the larger reconstruction rehabilitation projects may be funded from bond proceeds. It's a basket of different projects. I could keep talking for...
Well, I actually...
I'm kind of warming up. I was a little nervous to start with.
No, I had questions regarding the interdepartmental debt, but I don't want to go back there until we have exhausted this, or at least until you're completing your presentation, and/or if there's any other questions. And that's why we do need, where we don't borrow money to fix our roads, and we have a road funding source. I'm an advocate of paying it out of your fund instead of borrowing for the future. I mean, doing better budgeting versus borrowing to do what we need to get done. But just my opportunity, because I have the mic and the gavel to say all that. Any other points on the debt service?
Nothing I can think of.
So the interdepartment, I'm just going to go back. The interdepartmental, are those contracts that are discussed between the departments, or are they all statutory, all the different?
They're not statutory. So the Michigan Department of Transportation, like I said, many of the programs in the department are carried out under contract with, in some cases, like county road commissions, private contractors. This is a unique situation where the program is carried out in part by other state departments. In MDOT, there are contracts that identify the services performed, the anticipated cost, like a cost limit for the services, like a not to exceed amount. And there's typically a biannual audit. The legislative auditor general audits those contracts, the costs, to ensure that they're appropriate, adequately supported. So yes, that's a long answer, but yes, it's typically under contract. It is under contract.
And do we receive any interdepartmental grants to?
Who?
The Department of
So we've been talking
Transportation.
about interdepartmental grants where MDOT is the sending agency. They're receiving services from Department of Treasury, Management and Budget. There is one instance where MDOT is actually the service agency. They provide accounting services for the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development and for the DNR. And those two budgets provide funding to MDOT. So again, if you look in the budget bill, in the administrative section, there's an IDG that helps support the Accounting Service Center. So MDOT sends interdepartmental grants to other state agencies, and they receive an IDG from MDARD and DNR.
That was my, okay, so does the IDGs each year, and we have the authorizations for them, but where do we actually see the costs of each of these, each fiscal year? Like, so we're paying $20 million to the Secretary of State. How much does it actually cost us to have them collect fees for registration? I mean, that would, to see if we're even in line to being charged appropriately.
Well, as I said, there is a biannual audit where the Auditor General looks and audits the costs. Each year, the departments send a letter indicating what the cost is as compared to the appropriation amount. I don't know how else we know. Those are two ways that come to mind.
Because we're charging the max, maybe we're not getting the max service.
There is an actual, so some of the grants are fairly small. The bigger one, $20 million to the Secretary of State, the actual cost of that service is more like $90 million. So the MTF provides $20 million of this $90 million program, and there is an annual cost allocation study that a private consulting firm does to identify the actual cost of this program with the Department of State. And you can get that. It identifies all the factors that go into Department of State branch operations, how much is applicable to vehicle registration collections. And it's over 90. I think it was bumping on 100 million last time I looked, which seems like a lot, but it's a retail operation. This is a bit of an aside, but the Michigan Department of Treasury collects motor fuel taxes from a very small number of taxpayers, like big oil distributors. So it's a relatively easy tax to collect. The registration taxes, there are 10 million taxpayers, everybody that's got a registration, and it's collected in some part through 131 branch offices, so it's kind of a retail tax.
So we see what these costs are every 2 years or every year?
The audit is every 2 years.
Every 2 years, okay. Okay. All right. I think that's the presentation. Any follow-up that you'd like to add?
Nothing that comes to my mind. You know where to find me.
Yeah,
If you have follow-up questions.
yeah. So, you're good? Good? So with that, that concludes, wait, what do you have? No, I don't think so. Oh. Okay, thank you, Mr. Hamilton, and we've got the questions that we've had, and you are always available to answer questions. This is very confusing formulas, and the whole distribution is very confusing, and so you are available if you want a tutorial separately with Bill, and he's available to be able to go over that. He loves to talk about this stuff. So I appreciate you coming down, and there being no further questions or further business before the committee, this meeting is adjourned.